Hello and welcome to another painting video. In this video I'll be painting a Beast of Nurgle. Again! I wanted a new beast in my Maggotkin army, and of course I have to paint it differently than the one I already have. Variation is key. Let's have a look how I painted this disgusting fleshy blob of tentacles, shall we? After priming the model with Wraithbone, I paint the skin with Guilliman Flesh contrast paint. I focus mainly on the main body and not the underside. Contrast paint gives a lot of varying shades, but the skin needs to look more sickly. I use Carroburg Crimson to color all the open wounds. Carroburg Crimson already has a nice purplish hue, but I use Druchii Violet to really bring home the bruising of the skin on this model. Next, I'm using my new favorite shade called Mortarion Grime. Such aptly named. I painted on most areas of the skin to give it a more sickly green look. I dry brush Cadian Fleshtone on the skin, picking out all the raised areas. This will become a map to see where the highlights will go. I come back with Cadian Fleshtone, but with a small brush this time to feather on my highlights and bring back a little bit of the normal skin tone. I repeat the previous step with Kislev Flesh. And again, but this time I'm using Flayed One Flesh as my final highlight. A start has been made for this fleshy blob. Next, I'm going to paint the underside of his belly. I want the underbelly to be a different shade of gross skin. I first base coat with Rakarth Flesh. Next, I shade the model with Plaguebearer Flesh contrast paint. I dry brush on a mix of Rakarth Flesh and Pallid Flesh, leaving the green hue in the deep recesses. I apply the same mix of Rakarth Flesh and Pallid Flesh with a small brush to heighten the highlights even more. The highlight is Pallid Flesh. Finally, I shade the skin with Reikland Fleshshade. This is a different way to paint sickly skin. The green in the recesses works really well with the deep cracks in the skin. On to some pustules. Everyone's favorite step when painting Nurgle models. First, I paint all the pustules with Yriel Yellow. All the fat showing through the slits, I paint with Hobgrot Hide. Next, I highlight all the pustules and fat with Ushabti Bone. Finally, I give it all a wash of Seraphim Sepia. It's a lot of work, but if you take your time for it, it will look so ghastly on your model. Remember, painting gross is not an excuse to paint sloppy and fast. I am going to blatantly use the same recipe for Gore as I did in my last video. First, I'm going to pick up some parts with Kislev Flesh. Then I pick out some parts with Pink Horror. And finally with a mix of Pink Horror and Genestealer Purple. Making sure the ribcage is still white, I shade everything with a contrast paint Volupus Pink to bring it all together and make it look gross. Pallid switch flesh, I pick out some shiny highlights. I do love painting guts this way. I've also painted several wounds on his body the same way. There's a final step, but I'll get to that at the end of the video. I paint the tongue with Fenrisian Grey. Next, I shade the tongue with Druchii Violet. I bring back some Fenrisian Grey to highlight. And I end with a highlight of Blue Horror. All the teeth and horns I paint with Ushabti Bone. Shade with Skeleton Horde. And highlight with Screaming Skull. Painting the tongue in a completely different color really breaks up all the fleshiness of this model. Let's have a look at the tentacles next. I shade the white tentacles with Mortarion Grime. I haven't planned anything here, I'm just trying things out. Then I add the shade Athonian Camoshade to the base of the tentacles to add some more color to them. Next, I try a watered down Iyanden Yellow. I use Lahmian Medium for this on some of the tentacles. A very easy way to get some variation in this forest of tentacles. To add more color, I use Iyanden Yellow straight from the pot. I add two highlights with dry brushing. First, I use Krieg Khaki. Second, I use Screaming Skull. I don't think this model will work with pink or purple tentacles, as it will be more of the same color. Greenish tentacles really break it up nicely. All the eyes I first base coat with Wraithbone. The main eye is painted with Blood Angel Red, as I've done with all my demons. The other eyes I paint with Iyanden Yellow. I paint an iris with Evil Sunz Scarlet. I add a dot of Abaddon Black to paint the pupil. And I end with a dot of white scar to simulate a reflection. I use Lamenter's Yellow to yellow up parts of the skin. Unfortunately, this paint is no longer available and I really need to find an alternative. I get an old brush and make sure that I have very little Blood for the Blood God on it. Then I go to town on the entire model. Add where applicable. And as always, we end with a rich dosing of Nurgles Rot on the model. Great for covering up any mistakes you've made and to make those tentacles even more slimy. And here we have another Beast of Nurgle. I think he looks pretty great next to his body here. I can't wait to feature both of them in a game, backed up by Horticus Slimmix. If you want to know how I painted that model, you can check the link in the upper right corner. This concludes this mini run of Maggotkin of Nurgle models I still had to paint. But we're not done with Nurgle just yet. Next, I'll be starting my Horus Heresy army with a video on how to paint a Death Guard Tactical Marine. In the meantime, be sure to check out my Instagram, where I post pictures of current projects and behind the scenes stuff. But for now, thanks for watching.